There's a version of betrayal that doesn't just end a relationship, it ends the narcissist, not physically, not publicly, not in a way anyone watching from the outside would immediately understand, but somewhere deep in the architecture of who they are, in the fragile scaffolding they've spent a lifetime constructing to avoid ever facing themselves. Betraying a super empath sets off a collapse that no new relationship, no amount of charm, no carefully rehearsed story can ever fully repair. If you don't know what a super empath is, let me tell you exactly what makes her different, because it's the key to everything that happens after. A super empath isn't the empath who gives until she disappears, who forgives endlessly because she's terrified of conflict, who mistakes chaos for chemistry and confuses being needed with being loved. That version of empath, the wounded, boundaryless version, is exactly what a narcissist is hunting for. She's abundant supply with almost no risk attached. A super empath is a different creature entirely. She feels everything, reads everything, senses a lie forming in someone's chest before it's even reached their mouth. But she has also done the brutal, unglamorous work of healing her own wounds first. She knows her worth isn't up for negotiation. She has boundaries that don't bend just because someone cries hard enough or apologizes prettily enough. And most dangerously for a narcissist, she has something almost no one else in their orbit has ever had: the capacity to love them fully, see them completely, flaws, wounds, the whole unfiltered truth of who they are, and stay anyway, not out of desperation, but out of genuine, clear-eyed choice. This is why betraying her doesn't just cost the narcissist a partner, it costs them the one person who ever proved undeniably that they were lovable exactly as they were. Without the mask, without the performance, without the constant management of everyone else's perception. And once that proof is gone, once she walks away because of what they did, they lose access to it forever. Not because she's cruel, because trust, once broken by a super empath, doesn't get rebuilt through apology. It gets rebuilt through years of consistent change most narcissists are constitutionally incapable of sustaining. And she knows that better than anyone because she spent years studying the exact shape of their patterns before she ever loved them. Here's what almost nobody understands about why this particular betrayal is so catastrophic, so different from every other rupture in a narcissist's life. A super empath doesn't just love a narcissist. She sees them fully, the version they show the world and the version they hide from everyone, including themselves. And she loves them anyway. Not the fantasy, not the curated performance, the actual person underneath it. For someone whose entire identity is built on being perceived a certain way, being loved for the truth rather than the performance is not comfort. It's the single most stabilizing force they will ever encounter in their life. Which means betraying her isn't just a mistake. It's an act of self-sabotage so profound that most narcissists don't even realize they're committing it until it's already done, until the affair is discovered, until the lie unravels, until the years of subtle manipulation finally surface into something she can no longer excuse or explain away. And when she leaves, not in a rage, not with a scene, but with the calm, devastating finality of someone who has already grieved the relationship internally before ever saying a word out loud, something breaks in the narcissist that no future relationship will ever be able to fix. Because here's the mechanism almost no one talks about. Narcissists don't actually believe they're worthy of unconditional acceptance. Underneath the grandiosity, underneath the performed confidence, there is almost always a core of profound, unexamined shame, a belief planted early and reinforced over a lifetime that if people ever saw the real them, they would be rejected completely. This is why the mask exists in the first place. It's not vanity. It's armor built around a wound so old they've forgotten it's even there. A super empath, without ever intending to, becomes living proof that the wound was wrong, that the real unmasked version of them was lovable all along. And for a while, sometimes months, sometimes years, that proof holds them together in ways they can't explain and would never admit to needing. Betrayal shatters that proof instantly and permanently, because the moment they betray her, they're not just breaking a rule or damaging trust in the ordinary sense. They're proving their own oldest, most terrifying belief correct, that they really are the kind of person who destroys the good things in their life, who cannot be trusted with real intimacy, who was, underneath it all, exactly as unworthy as that original wound always warned them they were. And a super empath, once she sees the betrayal clearly, will not stay to help them carry that realization. She will not sacrifice herself to manage the fallout of a truth they created. She simply leaves and takes the proof of their worthiness with her. What's left behind isn't just heartbreak, it's a mirror with nothing left to reflect. And a person who has spent their entire life needing a mirror to know they exist cannot simply learn to live without one overnight. This is where the real unraveling begins, not in the dramatic days immediately after she leaves, but in the long, quiet aftermath, when the adrenaline of the crisis fades and all that's left is the silence she took with her. At first, they'll do what they've always done. They'll reach for a new mirror. It's instinctive, almost involuntary, a scramble to fill the vacancy before the emptiness has time to register fully. And for a while, it might even seem to work. New attention, new admiration, a new person willing to overlook the red flags because they haven't yet lived through the pattern the way the super empath did. But here's what they don't expect, what nothing in their history has prepared them for. This new person cannot do what she did, because what she did wasn't performance, wasn't naivety, wasn't a temporary blindness to who they really were. She saw everything and chose to stay anyway, out of clarity, not confusion. No one replicates that by accident. It has to be earned, and earning it requires exactly the kind of sustained, humbling change a narcissist's defenses were built to prevent. So the new mirror reflects something thinner, something that flickers instead of holds steady. And in the gap between what they need and what this new person can actually provide, the old wound, the one the super empath's love had quieted for the first time in their life, starts to ache again, except now it aches without relief, because the only person who ever proved it wrong is gone, and she is not coming back to prove it wrong a second time. This is when the real reckoning begins, and it rarely announces itself as a single moment. It creeps in sideways, the way all narcissistic collapse tends to. It shows up as a restlessness that follows them into every new relationship, a low hum of dissatisfaction they can't quite name. Because nothing, no amount of admiration, no amount of new supply, ever quite reaches the place her love used to reach. It shows up as an irrational, disproportionate anger whenever the new partner falls short in some small way, because that small failure is a reminder, however unconscious, of exactly what was lost. It shows up as insomnia, as compulsive scrolling through old photos they'll never admit to looking at, as a private, wordless grief they cannot share with anyone, because sharing it would require admitting the depth of what they destroyed. And admitting that would mean confronting the shame the super empath's presence used to hold at bay. And here is the part that makes this particular kind of loss so uniquely inescapable. They cannot even properly grieve her, because grieving her honestly would require accepting responsibility for why she's gone. Most narcissists cannot do this without their entire identity threatening to come apart. So instead of grief, they get a strange, suspended state, a mourning with no permission to exist, a loss they can't name out loud without indicting themselves in the process. This is far more corrosive than ordinary heartbreak, because ordinary heartbreak, however painful, eventually processes and moves through a person. A grief you're not allowed to feel doesn't move. It just sits there, quietly poisoning everything it touches. Meanwhile, something even more devastating is unfolding in parallel, something that has nothing to do with longing and everything to do with identity. Because the super empath wasn't just a source of love, she was, in a very real sense, a container for the narcissist's better self. The version of them that showed up for her, that softened around her, that occasionally, in rare, unguarded moments, let the mask slip enough to be genuinely tender. That version existed largely because of her. She called it out of them, not through pressure, but through the simple, radical act of seeing it and responding to it when it appeared. Without her, that version doesn't just go dormant. For many narcissists, it disappears almost entirely because there's no one left who knows how to summon it, no one left who recognizes it enough to reward it when it surfaces. This is the cruel, permanent cost of betraying a super empath. It doesn't just cost them her, it costs them the best available version of themselves, the one that only ever existed in relation to her steady, clear-eyed love. And every relationship that follows becomes a slightly worse copy of what once was. Not because the new partners are lesser people, but because the narcissist, without her, has less access to whatever fragile capacity for goodness she used to draw out of them. Some of them will spend years chasing a feeling they can't articulate, moving from partner to partner, searching for a version of what they had without ever understanding that what made it work wasn't just her love, it was her seeing them clearly and choosing to stay despite it. That combination is exceedingly rare. Most people either can't see a narcissist clearly, or they see clearly and leave immediately. A super empath does both. She sees, she understands, she stays through the hard, unglamorous work of loving a difficult person honestly. And then when betrayed, she leaves anyway, because seeing clearly also means recognizing exactly when staying stops being love and starts being self-destruction. And once she's gone, once that singular, irreplaceable combination has walked out the door for good, the narcissist is left facing something they have spent their entire life architecting their whole personality to avoid, the plain, undecorated truth of who they are, with no one left whose presence used to make that truth bearable. This is where the real hell begins, not the performed suffering they might display for sympathy, not the curated sadness posted for an audience still willing to offer comfort, but the private, wordless collapse that happens in the moments no one else ever sees. Because here is the mechanism that makes this particular ending so permanent, so resistant to the usual narcissistic recovery playbook of new supply and rewritten narratives. A super empath doesn't just leave a hole shaped like companionship. She leaves a hole shaped like proof. Proof that they were capable of being loved fully, seen completely, and chosen anyway. And proof, once withdrawn, cannot be manufactured by anyone who wasn't there to witness the original truth. Every new partner who tells them they're wonderful is, in some unconscious corner of the narcissist's mind, suspect, because that person doesn't know the whole story, hasn't seen the worst of it. And therefore their admiration carries an asterisk the narcissist can never quite silence. Only she knew everything, only she chose anyway, and only she was capable of walking away when the choosing stopped making sense. This is why so many narcissists who betray a super empath spend the rest of their lives in a strange, muted version of their former selves, still charming on the surface, still capable of drawing people in, but missing something underneath that used to make the charm feel alive rather than mechanical. Friends who knew them before will sometimes say it without quite knowing what they mean. They seem different now. Something's off. They used to have more light in them. That light wasn't manufactured by confidence or success or admiration. It was the specific, irreplaceable effect of being loved by someone who saw everything and stayed anyway. And it doesn't relight easily if it relights at all. Some of them will spend years, sometimes decades, chasing a facsimile of what they destroyed, moving from relationship to relationship, each one a little more hollow than the last, each one ending a little faster, as the pattern that once took years to surface now reveals itself in months, then weeks, because a person who has lost access to their better self has fewer and fewer moments where that self appears to buy them any time. Others will retreat further into isolation, building a life that looks, from a distance, successful and full, while privately becoming someone even their closest allies find harder and harder to be around. Because without her steady presence calling out the good in them, there is less and less good available to call. And a small number, rare but not impossible, will eventually do the thing that could have saved the relationship in the first place, had they done it in time. They will sit in the shame instead of running from it. They will let the collapse happen fully instead of papering over it with new supply. They will do the excruciating, unglamorous work of becoming someone capable of the honesty she always offered them freely. If that happens, it will not undo what was lost. It will not bring her back, and it should not, because her healing was never contingent on their transformation, and it never will be. But it is, at least, the only path available to them that doesn't end in that same hollow loop, repeating itself indefinitely with different names attached to the same outcome. For the super empath herself, though, for the woman who saw clearly, loved fully, and left when leaving became the only act of self-respect available to her, the ending looks entirely different and infinitely lighter, because she does not carry what they carry. She does not spend her nights chasing a version of herself that only existed in relation to someone else's approval. She doesn't need a mirror to know she exists, because she already knows, has always known, long before she ever walked into that relationship and long after she walked out of it. What she carries instead is clarity, the hard-won, unshakable kind that comes from loving someone completely, seeing exactly who they were capable of being and who they actually chose to be, and understanding without bitterness that the gap between those two things was never hers to close. She carries the knowledge that her empathy was never the weakness the relationship tried to convince her it was. It was the very thing that let her see the truth clearly enough to finally permanently walk away from it. And this is the final truth underneath everything we've walked through together. Betraying a super empath doesn't just cost a narcissist a relationship. It costs them the only proof they will likely ever receive that they were worthy of being loved exactly as they are. That proof does not renew. It does not transfer to the next person willing to overlook what she could no longer excuse. It simply ends permanently the moment she closes the door and takes with her the one thing they can never manufacture, perform, or replace. They will spend the rest of their lives searching for a version of what they destroyed, and somewhere, far away from the wreckage of who they used to convince themselves they were, she will be living proof of something they'll never understand about themselves again. That some doors, once closed by someone who truly saw you, do not reopen, no matter how long you stand outside them, waiting for a light that isn't coming back on.